Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament, looking at the New Testament church. And today we're going to be in Hebrews 11. This is Hebrews 11, 1 through 40. And like I mentioned yesterday, I'm not going to read all these verses. We're actually going to look at the first verse and then we'll look at the notes. So my encouragement for you is to stop, or if you want to go, just listen to the notes first and then go and read the rest of Hebrews 11. It's the entire chapter, and this is known as the Great Faith chapter. It lists just multiple people from the Old Testament who showed and demonstrated great faith in God, and most of them are those that we read about growing up as kids and different things like that. And so, but I just highly recommend you go back through, read Hebrews 11, and can look at the list of all of those who he mentions of great faith. And so the one thing I'm going to do is read Hebrews 11, verse 1, and this is faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see. And so, what the author does here with this chapter, this whole chapter, he's presenting readers with a long catalog of faithful field or faith-filled heroes that, like I said, a lot of these are from our, if you grew up in the church, or a little bit, you kind of remember some of these childhood heroes from the Bible. It builds up an overwhelming evidence. It builds up overwhelming evidence that the life of faith is the only real life, the way to live for God. Right? The writer the writer repeats. I'm sorry. The phrase "by faith" to drive the main message into the minds, into the hearts of the hearers. Right? It's by faith this person, by faith this person. And so we're going to see this pattern that follows. He'll basically, what the author does is, you'll see the phrase "by faith," right, and then the name of the person that he's talking about, and then the event or action which demonstrated that faith, and then the outcome of that, what happened because of that. And so, but before presenting the list of examples, the author defines what faith is, and it is acting on what God has revealed about His will and character. So it's acting on who God has revealed, who He is. And so then we have this confidence of faith that is based on God who fulfills His promises. um, the word assurance that we see in here, the assurance we have around our faith and those things, the way it's the word that's translated here for assurance means an active certainty that what God has promised will come to pass despite our not yet seeing it, right? And so that's the way that's translated. And so we need to understand is like, we have this assurance of faith, right? We have this assurance of things we haven't seen yet, but we have assurance on God who keeps His promises that they are going to be delivered. And so the idea that's presented here is that it is impossible to please God without faith, right? If you look at verse 10, I'm sorry, chapter 10, verse 38, which quotes Habakkuk 2:4, right? That we looked at yesterday. And so we have to have faith in order to please God. There's no other way. And so faith must include believing that God exists and that He rewards those who sincerely seek Him. It's not just, oh, well, I believe God exists a little bit, and so I just go around like I talked about yesterday, right? You just believe well, I said I believed, and go around and just live whatever life I want to. No, it's, if you truly have faith, then you're going to follow and do the things that God and Christ has asked us to do. And so that's kind of the overwhelming theme and arc that we see here through all these is these people have faith and they obey God. They did exactly what He said. And so the other thing we see here is that in life's difficulties, right, the readers, right, we are challenged to trust God and to anticipate the fulfillment of His promises. And so, like I said, some of these writers, some of these people that the people that they were written to were under persecution, and we see that a lot in a lot of the letters of the New Testament. They were under really hard times, and so it was a reminder to keep their faith, even though they were going through something that was difficult or they were being persecuted. And so the great examples of faith here actually starts all the way in from Genesis, right? We see, I think, Abel, all the way through Abraham's family to Rahab and to others. And so the reason that all these are listed is this builds up evidence that faith is the only appropriate response to God. We don't see anyone else mentioned here that that says, hey, these people, well, even though they didn't have faith, right, they were lifted up. So no, everyone who's lifted up that we see in the Old Testament had faith and had a proper response to God. And so, in this rapid series of examples, the author gives an overview of other faithful people through the rest of the Old Testament era. And so we see this over and over, and the outcome of the faith is deliverance and victory. Always it may not be in the way we want it to be, or may not be how we think it should play out, but in the end, it still is. The outcome of their faith is deliverance and victory. But the thing we also see toward the end of chapter 11 is that faith brought severe persecution and even martyrdom sometimes. And so it wasn't always just, oh, well, you believe in God and everything's going to be wonderful and great and perfect. And, you're never going to have any issues and you're always going to have food on the table. You're always, no, like this is no, that's not what following God represents. Sometimes it can be hard, right? There can be severe consequences for it. But in the end, we see the outcome is deliverance and victory. So that's what we need to understand in this. And so the results for both groups was that God honored them. Right, with both groups that he goes through in this is that God honored them with a good reputation because of their faith. Right, these people weren't perfect. They messed up. They did some really bad things. Um, you know, they were human, but they still were faithful to what God asked them to do, and they followed along and do that. And so this is a way to live, right? Us as God's people under the new covenant, we are to live as all these people did under the old covenant. And it's by faith in God's promises that enduring any difficult that we can endure any difficulties that we face in the world and that we see here. And so, again, I encourage you to go back. I wasn't going to read all 40 verses for you to you. That's a long read, the entire chapter. But I encourage you to just go back and read through this and look at all these great examples of faith. And then maybe even, especially if you have a study Bible, go back and research and read on all the different people that's mentioned here, right? All the faith-filled heroes that we see in of the Old Testament, and just read a little bit about their story and who they were and how it is their faith that saved them, how it is their faith that helped them endure, how it is what God was looking for was their faith, like not just their actions. Now their faith produced the actions, right? There was examples. There was, they lived their faith out. But in the end, it was their faith that gave them, what God was looking for, and what lifted them up. It was their faith in God that resulted in the things that they did and who they were and who they become. So again, as always, I hope you learn from this. I hope you get something out of it and see and use these as great examples of how we are to live by faith. As always, I encourage you to subscribe to the YouTube, our channel. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't had a chance to do that. And as always, I appreciate everyone who takes time to watch this, and I hope y'all have a wonderful day.